So, back in 1770, there's this really fascinating historical legend about Captain James Cook.
Oh, yeah, with the HMS Endeavour, right.
Exactly. So, he anchors this massive, towering wooden ship right off the coast of Australia. And according to the story, the indigenous tribes on the shore, they didn't react at all.
They just kept fishing.
Right. They went about their daily routines as if this colossal wooden leviathan wasn't just, sitting right there in their bay. And the theory goes that the concept of a massive European sailing ship was so radically foreign to their understanding of reality.
Like, completely outside their conceptual framework.
Yeah, totally outside of it. So their brains literally just filtered it out as meaningless background noise. They simply couldn't see it.
Which is wild. But they did react eventually, right?
They did, but only when Cook's men lowered the small wooden rowboats to come ashore. Because a small wooden boat was something they conceptually understood. It fit their reality.
It's just such a profound anecdote about human perception. I mean, our brains are not passive cameras, just recording objective truth.
Right, they're editors.
Exactly. They are active editors, furiously cutting and splicing sensory data based on what we already believe is possible. If a piece of data violates our established parameters of reality, the brain's first instinct isn't curiosity. It's just deletion.
Which forces you, sitting there listening to this deep dive right now, to ask a fairly uncomfortable question. What is hovering right in front of you today that your brain is actively filtering out, just because you simply don't have the concepts to see it yet?
That is the question, isn't it?
It is. And welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to take you on a journey through one of the most multi-layered and expansive transcripts we've encountered in a long time.
It really is expansive.
Yeah. It originates from a long-form discussion on a Dutch broadcast channel called Ongehoord Nederland, and what starts as a seemingly straightforward conversation about political UFO disclosures just absolutely spirals.
Oh, it goes off the deep end in the best way possible.
Right into the most complex questions of human consciousness, psychedelics, and, like we said, the biological limits of our own perception.
The material is genuinely compelling. Because it was initially planned as just a quick follow-up to a 23-minute video column about UFOs.
Just a standard segment.
Right. But the participants, they hit a wall very early on. They realized that you cannot squeeze the ontological implications of extraterrestrial contact into a standard 40-minute television format.
Or the mechanics of human belief, for that matter.
Exactly. The scope just demands a much larger, unrestrained philosophical exploration.
But before we jump into the deep end of that exploration, we definitely need to lay down an essential impartiality disclaimer here.
Yeah, that's crucial given the source.
Right. So the source material we're unpacking touches on some highly polarized political figures, specifically Donald Trump and former President Barack Obama. Furthermore, Ongehoord Nederland is a Dutch program that regularly covers politically charged domestic topics in the Netherlands.
Right, heavy stuff.
Yeah, like controversial demographic changes and replacement theories, which they refer to in Dutch as omvolking. So we want to be unequivocally clear to you, the listener. In this deep dive, we are impartially reporting the contents of the source material.
We're just the messengers.
Exactly. We are not taking any political sides, nor are we endorsing any of these political viewpoints, left-wing or right-wing. Our focus is strictly and exclusively on how these political elements serve as the catalyst for the broader philosophical discussion about UFOs and consciousness.
Because the political context is really just the ignition switch here. And it's a fascinating ignition switch when you consider the baseline of the program.
Right, because Ongehoord Nederland typically grounds itself in very heavy terrestrial concerns.
Yeah, they cover the soaring cost of expensive groceries, inflation, those demographic controversies you mentioned. It's a show heavily rooted in the day-to-day grounded struggles of citizens.
Which makes an abrupt pivot to unidentified flying objects so jarring. I mean, why would a citizen who is stressed about the price of bread suddenly care about extraterrestrials?
Well, the catalyst, according to the discussion, is political momentum in the United States. Specifically, Donald Trump's campaign promises regarding disclosure, the explicit release of hidden government UFO files.
And comments from Barack Obama, too, right?
Yeah, expressing a willingness to act as a planetary emissary if extraterrestrials were proven to exist.
Which is wild to hear from a former president. And for decades, this entire concept of UFOs was completely quarantined in the realm of speculative fiction.
Right. The discussion references Isaac Asimov, Star Trek, Star Wars. It was categorized as fantasy.
Structurally isolated from the evening news or geopolitical policy.
But when a sitting or former president integrates the topic into their public platform, It triggers what philosophers call an ontological shift. It alters the fundamental nature of how the subject exists in the public consciousness.
It transitions from magical thinking into a falsifiable reality. When a president talks about it, it suddenly possesses geopolitical gravity.
It forces hardcore skeptics to look up from their spreadsheets, because the machinery of the state is acknowledging it.
Consider the mechanics of validation, though. The traditional gatekeepers of reality have always been government institutions and mainstream academia, but we are currently navigating the podcast era, right?
Oh, absolutely. Joe Rogan is cited as a primary example in the source, but the landscape is vast. Long-form digital media and modern documentaries are completely democratizing whistleblower testimony.
Yeah, you no longer have to wait for a heavily redacted 400-page Pentagon report that just obscures the truth in bureaucratic jargon.
You could just pull up YouTube.
Exactly. You can watch a 3-hour interview with a decorated Navy pilot who is breaking down exactly what their FLIR radar captured. The G-forces, the object pulled, the maneuvers it executed. It circumvents the traditional filter entirely.
And this creates a really powerful feedback loop between decentralized media and institutional science. A prime example they highlight involves the philosopher Nick Bostrom.
Oh, the simulation trilemma guy.
Right. Bostrom authored this highly rigorous academic paper positing the mathematical and statistical probability that we are living in a computer simulation.
Which sounds like sci-fi until you read the math.
Exactly. He argued that if an advanced civilization ever reaches the capability to run high-fidelity simulations of their ancestors, they would likely run millions of them. Therefore, statistically, it is 1,000,000 times more likely that we are inside one of those simulations than in base reality.
And when a respected academic at Oxford publishes that, it sends a massive shockwave backward through the fringe communities. The conversation notes how Bostrom's rigorous math suddenly provided retroactive credibility to theories that were previously just laughed out of the room.
Yeah, take someone like David Icke, who built a controversial empire on theories about reality being a holographic simulation manipulated by reptilian entities.
Right, for decades he was the definition of fringe.
But Bostrom's paper, well, didn't validate reptilian entities, obviously, but it validated the structural mechanism of the simulation. It demonstrates how mainstream science can unintentionally legitimize fringe beliefs.
It pulls the concept of a simulated reality out of the esoteric ether and grounds it in statistical probability. It makes the impossible calculable.
Yeah, it gives it weight.
But if we look closely at this sudden wave of political disclosure, there is a massive contradiction staring us in the face. I mean, it's like finding out your highly conservative accountant is secretly a ghost hunter. It's so out of character that it forces you to take it seriously. But we operate in a society that is deeply cynical about political truth.
Oh, extremely cynical.
We assume politicians manipulate facts regarding the economy, foreign wars, healthcare to serve their own agendas. So if we already know politicians manipulate the truth, why are we suddenly trusting them when they talk about extraterrestrials?
That's a great point. And the participants argue that the power isn't necessarily in the truth of the politician's statement. It is in the utility of the statement. The mere act of a geopolitical leader bringing UFOs into the policy arena is the mechanism of change.
Because it forces everyone else to react.
Exactly. If a president promises declassification, that action forces the intelligence apparatus, the military-industrial complex, the global media they all have, to engage with the framework. The underlying political motive might be entirely self-serving. It could be a distraction or a justification for defense spending.
But the resulting engagement with the phenomenon becomes an undeniable, concrete reality. The structural engagement is real, even if the origin is manipulative. That makes total sense. But then the conversation takes a very sharp, intimate turn away from global politics to the personal roots of belief and skepticism.
This is a fascinating part of the broadcast.
Yeah. One of the participants shares a childhood origin story that perfectly encapsulates this tension. So they grew up in Zandvoort, a coastal town in the Netherlands, right on the North Sea.
And as a 10 or 12-year-old walking the dog with their mother in the evenings, they would often look up at the sky. Zandvoort hosted various festivals, and the organizers would project these massive laser searchlights up onto the low-hanging coastal clouds.
Just sweeping erratically across the sky.
Right. And to a naive child, those sweeping lights were absolute proof. They saw UFOs.
Because they wanted to believe. The cultural conditioning of movies and comic books had primed them to look for the mysterious, and the festival lights provided the raw data to confirm it.
But that initial innocent belief collides violently with reality during middle school. In the Dutch school system, the broeklas, the first year of high school, is a socially delicate time, to say the least.
Yeah, kids are brutal.
Exactly. And the speaker recalls reading a tabloid magazine called Privé, which their mother had bought. This was in the mid-1990s, the era of the infamous Roswell alien autopsy video.
Oh, wow, yeah. A completely ubiquitous piece of 90s media. Grainy, black and white footage of figures in white hazmat suits dissecting a supposedly extraterrestrial biological entity.
And the speaker was utterly captivated. They bought into the narrative completely, absorbing the video stills and the leaked article. So they go to school the next day, brimming with this world-shattering information, ready to enlighten their classmates.
And when asked for their source, they proudly cited the Privé tabloid.
Yeah. And the social execution was swift and merciless. They were laughed out of the room, complete humiliation.
But that specific trauma is vital, because long before they encountered concepts like confirmation bias or the scientific method in a university setting, that moment of sheer social embarrassment birthed a rigorous internal skeptic.
It planted the realization that intense desire for a thing to be true does not make it true, and that the provenance of information is everything.
It's the psychological tightrope. How do you maintain wonder without falling into delusion? The speaker notes that while other childhood obsessions faded, like baking bread or buying a telescope, the fascination with the unknown persisted.
But it was forced to mature.
Yeah, it evolved from naive acceptance into a state of hypercritical investigation. They learned to balance the innate human desire for wonder with a harsh, self-correcting skepticism.
And this methodology manifests in the application of the 955 rule.
Right, explain that rule.
So in any serious investigation of unidentified aerial phenomena, 95% of the data can be discarded almost immediately. It is Venus refracting through atmospheric distortion, it's a weather balloon, it's a flock of geese illuminated by city lights, or a parallax optical illusion created by a camera moving relative to a slow-moving drone.
And it's that remaining 5% that forces the conversation forward. Cases that just defy conventional physics and atmospheric explanations. Yet even within that 5%, the speaker admits that their rigorous internal filter rejects almost all of it. They only find a microscopic fraction genuinely compelling.
Which introduces a distinctly modern problem, which they call the crisis of reality. Because our own human technology has advanced at an exponential rate, visual evidence is no longer the unimpeachable standard it was in the 1990s.
It's so easy to fake things now.
Exactly. The speaker admits that even if a massive classic saucer-shaped UFO descended and hovered directly over the canals of Amsterdam today, their primary instinct would not be to accept it as extraterrestrial.
They would assume it was Project Bluebeam or some highly classified psychological operation utilizing advanced optical tech.
Right. And Project Bluebeam, for those unfamiliar, is this prevalent conspiracy theory originating in the 1990s. It suggests that global elites will eventually stage a massive, holographic alien invasion using advanced satellite projection technology to unite humanity under a single global government.
Which sounds completely unhinged at first.
It does. But while highly speculative, the underlying technological premise that we can project convincing optical illusions at scale is no longer entirely fiction.
No, not at all. The speaker specifically references a Chinese esports tournament. During the opening ceremony, the organizers utilized advanced 3D laser mapping and projection technology to send a massive, incredibly realistic holographic dragon flying around the stadium.
It roared, it cast shadows, and to the naked eye of the people in the stands, it was virtually indistinguishable from reality.
Which is wild, because if human entertainment companies can generate a hyper-realistic dragon in a stadium, what can classified military black-budget programs generate in the open sky?
This is the core of the modern crisis. We're behaving like a magician's assistant who has spent 20 years backstage. We know how the trapdoors operate, we understand the mirrored cabinets and the sleight of hand.
And once you know how many tricks exist, you stop believing in magic entirely. Even if something truly supernatural occurs right in front of you, you would just start looking for the wires.
Precisely.
But that raises a big question. Are we at a point where human technology is so advanced that genuine extraterrestrial contact is fundamentally unprovable to the naked eye? If so, where do you turn for evidence?
You have to pivot away from grainy photographs and easily manipulated digital videos. You have to look at highly documented, multi-witness historical encounters. Cases where the corroborating data and the sheer scale of the event make holograms or simple hoaxes statistically impossible.
And the discussion highlights several of these anomalous historical cases. They begin with an event close to their own geography, the Soesterberg incident in the Netherlands in 1979.
Where 12 separate military personnel witnessed a massive triangular craft hovering over an airbase in the early hours of the morning.
And the crucial context here, which is heavily emphasized in the discussion, is the nature of the Soesterberg base at that specific time during the Cold War. It was reportedly a storage site for nuclear weapons.
Which is not an isolated detail. It is a recurring motif in the UFO phenomenon. The objects display a highly specific, targeted interest in humanity's nuclear capabilities. We'll analyze the implications of that behavior later, but it establishes that these events are not random wanderings.
No, there's a pattern. They then examined the Belgian UFO wave, a sustained period of sightings that lasted for 6 months, from late 1989 into 1990.
The Belgian wave is significant because of the density of the data. You didn't just have isolated civilian sightings. You had thousands of witnesses reporting massive, silent, triangular platforms moving at impossible speeds.
And crucially, the civilian accounts were corroborated by law enforcement. Police officers pursued one of these objects for 30 to 45 minutes, maintaining visual contact while other police teams tracked it from different jurisdictions.
Yeah, and this visual data was heavily supported by NATO radar installations, tracking objects, making altitude drops, and speed accelerations that would just disintegrate any conventional human aircraft.
They also reference the Rendlesham Forest incident in late 1980, often called Britain's Roswell, involving highly credible military personnel at a joint U.S. and U.K. NATO base. But the true crown jewel of the evidence presented, the case that occupies the most analytical weight in the transcript, is the Ariel School incident in Zimbabwe in 1994.
The Ariel School incident is a foundational pillar for those studying close encounters because it removes the military and geopolitical variables entirely. You have 62 school children ranging in age from roughly 8 to 12 years old playing outside during morning recess.
Because the teachers are inside having a faculty meeting.
Right. And the children witness a silver craft descend and land in the brush near the edge of the schoolyard boundary.
And it's not just a craft. Entities exit the ship. The broadcast actually plays the original audio of these children being interviewed by a Harvard psychiatrist shortly after the event, and the level of detail is chilling. The children describe beings with oversized heads, large black eyes, and very small noses and mouths.
And when analyzing witness testimony, investigators look for the specific vocabulary used to describe the anomalous. One child explains that the entity stared at them, quote, strangely, like an old woman who hasn't seen a kid before.
That is such a viscerally authentic detail. A child attempting to process a completely alien encounter doesn't use sterile clinical language. They reach for the closest emotional touchstone they have. The intense, scrutinizing, slightly unnerving stare of an elderly relative. It anchors the bizarre in human reality.
Yeah, the physical movement of the entities is equally specific and unusual. The children didn't describe them walking normally. One child recounts the being running in slow motion, describing the movement as bouncy.
Bouncy? Like low gravity.
Exactly. It is akin to the low-gravity bounding of an Apollo astronaut on the lunar surface, but happening in Earth's gravity. The entity would bound toward them, suddenly vanish in a poof, and then instantaneously reappear back by the ship, repeating this looping behavior.
Even the auditory details are uniquely compelling. The craft didn't emit the roaring thrust of a jet engine or a rocket booster. The children described a high-pitched, oscillating whistling sound. And the discussion points out an incredible anachronism here. The sound those children describe in rural Zimbabwe in 1994 is virtually identical to the high-pitched whine a Tesla electric motor makes under heavy acceleration today.
They were describing advanced electromagnetic propulsion audio decades before it became a commonplace sound.
Naturally, an event of this magnitude draws intense scrutiny from professional skeptics. The discussion explicitly addresses the counter-arguments, specifically citing the theories put forward by Mick West.
Right? West suggested a hypothesis of mass hysteria triggered by a mundane event. He posited that a traveling AIDS awareness bus, which were somewhat common in African nations at the time, might have driven near the school.
A bus.
Yeah, a bus. And the children, primed by local folklore or perhaps a recent meteor shower, saw the aid workers wearing perhaps strange clothing or manipulating puppets, and their collective imagination spiraled out of control.
A puppet show on a bus. I mean, when you place that theory next to the granular data, it simply collapses under its own weight.
It does. The Pota theory fails to account for the convergence of highly specific, unprompted details from 62 separate witnesses. Mass hysteria can induce general panic, sure, but it rarely induces 62 people to independently hallucinate a whistling electric motor, low-gravity bounding, and the specific emotional weight of an entity's stare.
Right, but the most significant piece of evidence that dismantles the mass hysteria theory is the telepathic message the children received.
When the entities lock eyes with the children, the kids reported receiving a sudden influx of images and feelings directly into their minds. It wasn't spoken out loud.
And the core theme of the transmission was deeply cautionary, focusing on environmental destruction and the misuse of technology. One of the young girls, struggling to articulate the alien concept she had just absorbed, told the interviewer that the message was, "You're becoming too technologist."
Two technologists. The grammatical imperfection is the hallmark of authenticity there. If this event were a rehearsed hoax orchestrated by the children, or a narrative fed to them by an adult seeking attention, the language would likely be dramatically sound. A script would read, "You are too focused on technology," or "Your technology is destroying the planet."
But two technologists is exactly what happens when a massive, complex, telepathic concept is forcefully squeezed through the limited vocabulary of a primary school student. The conceptual payload survives, but the grammar breaks under the pressure.
Furthermore, investigators asked the children to draw what they saw, and the drawings were not perfectly identical. Some children drew a single saucer, others drew a main craft accompanied by smaller objects. Some drew one entity, others drew two or three. One child even insisted that one of the beings had long, dark hair.
Which is actually a good thing for their credibility. I mean, it's like eyewitnesses to a bank robbery. The adrenaline is pumping so hard you might get the getaway car's color wrong, but you definitely remember the gun. If you interview 5 witnesses and they all give the exact same, flawlessly identical story, detectives immediately know they're lying.
Perfect consistency implies collusion.
Right. The minor discrepancies in the Ariel School drawings, the varying numbers of entities, the hair, are exactly how the human brain encodes memory under extreme adrenal stress. You might focus entirely on one detail while someone else focuses on another, but every single child agreed on the core, paradigm-shattering facts of the event.
However, the Ariel School encounter introduces a profound logical paradox regarding the motives of these intelligences. If a highly advanced civilization, whether extraterrestrial or interdimensional, possesses the capability to manipulate gravity and transmit telepathic warnings of the fate of the planet, why deliver that warning to a group of primary school children in 1994 Zimbabwe?
Right. I mean, those children had absolutely zero geopolitical leverage. They couldn't influence global carbon emissions or technological policy. If the goal is to alter the trajectory of human civilization, you land on the lawn of the White House or the plaza of the United Nations in Geneva. You don't land in a schoolyard in southern Africa. It fundamentally defies anthropocentric logic.
And this lack of human logic heavily implies that we are attempting to map human geopolitical strategies onto entities that operate on entirely different paradigms. Their actions seem almost experiential, or perhaps educational on a scale we don't comprehend.
Which provides a perfect transition into the most speculative, unsettling, and highly debated segment of the entire broadcast.
Oh, this part is wild.
Yeah, we are leaving the realm of historical schoolyard encounters and entering the highly classified, deeply controversial territory of modern aviation mysteries. The discussion tackles the disappearance of Malaysian Airlines flight MH370.
In March of 2014, a Boeing 777 carrying 239 people vanished from radar over the South China Sea. Despite massive international search efforts, the core mystery of its disappearance remains unresolved in the public sphere. But the source introduces a deeply elaborate theory championed by a researcher named Ashton Forbes.
Okay, so according to this theory, roughly 6 days after MH370 vanished, 2 pieces of footage leaked onto the internet. One appeared to be a thermal imaging video, and the other appeared to be stereoscopic optical footage captured by a drone. Both videos show a passenger airliner matching the profile of a Boeing 777 in level flight.
And then, suddenly, 3 mysterious glowing orbs appear and begin tightly circling the aircraft, leaving visible contrails.
The orbs spin faster and faster, closing in on the plane, and then in a massive flash of energy, the plane completely vanishes. Just a literal poof and empty sky.
The life cycle of these videos is as fascinating as their content, really, because they sat on various internet forums and video hosting sites for nearly 9 years.
Well, almost a decade.
Yeah. They were largely dismissed as impressive, if morbid, computer-generated imagery. Perhaps a portfolio piece, by a visual effects artist or a bizarre video game edit.
And it's completely understandable why it was ignored. I mean, if you're scrolling through the internet in 2015 and you see a video of a plane being zapped out of existence by 3 glowing orbs, your brain's biological filter, the same filter the indigenous tribes used to ignore Captain Cook's ship, kicks in instantly. You label it fake and you keep scrolling.
But Forbes alleges that deep analysis of the footage reveals elements that are virtually impossible to fake. By analyzing the screen captures of the video, he claims to have found specific telemetry data and coordinate codes embedded in the frame. These codes allegedly link the perspective of the footage directly to specific, highly classified U.S. spy drones.
Specifically the MQ-1C Gray Eagle, right?
Exactly. And advanced military satellite systems.
The physics underlying Forbes' theory are just staggering. He isn't suggesting that aliens teleported the plane. He is suggesting that the technology shown in the video is human, specifically developed by U.S. defense contractors like Lockheed Martin. The theory proposes that the 3 orbs generate an artificial Einstein-Rosen bridge.
To understand an Einstein-Rosen bridge, or a wormhole, you have to look at the fabric of space-time in general relativity. Imagine space-time as a flat sheet of paper. If you want to travel from point A on the left side to point B on the right side, you must travel across the linear distance of the paper.
Right, normal travel.
But an Einstein-Rosen bridge proposes that massive gravitational forces can actually fold the paper in half, bringing point A and point B together, allowing an object to step instantaneously from one location to the other without traversing the intervening space. The theory posits that the U.S. military has weaponized this theoretical physics, allowing them to fold space-time around a commercial airliner moving at 500 miles per hour.
But the obvious question is, why? Why utilize reality-breaking technology on a civilian flight? The theory points to the passenger manifest. Among the passengers were 20 scientists and engineers, including 6 highly key elite researchers who were allegedly on the verge of defecting to China with deeply sensitive, paradigm-shifting technological knowledge.
And the U.S., unwilling to let that knowledge fall into the hands of a geopolitical rival, but unable to shoot down a civilian airliner without triggering an international crisis, utilized the teleportation tech to simply remove the plane from the board.
And the leak of the footage. The theory posits it was orchestrated by a Chinese-American intelligence whistleblower, identified by the pseudonym Lin. The objective of the leak was not to inform the general public, but to serve as a back-channel warning to the Chinese government, a way of saying, look at the capabilities the West possesses. Do not escalate.
Let's assume, purely for the sake of the philosophical argument, that this technology exists. The geopolitical implications are absolute checkmate. The discussion points out that the West has seemed remarkably unbothered by recent Russian rhetoric regarding nuclear escalation. The speculative answer is that the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, MAD, is completely obsolete.
Because if you possess a defense system that can instantaneously fold spacetime around an incoming intercontinental ballistic missile traveling at Mach 20 and teleport that warhead into the vacuum of deep space, you have neutralized the ultimate weapon. A nuclear threat is meaningless against an adversary who controls the fabric of reality.
And to support the plausibility of the orb mechanism, the discussion notes that this specific visual motif is not isolated to the MH370 footage. There are numerous documented eyewitness accounts and radar anomalies involving similar small, spherical orbs hovering in close proximity to ordinary passenger planes, including specific sightings near the Madrid airport.
It suggests a persistent global presence of these monitoring devices.
It does. But the psychological crux of this entire segment is the apathy of the masses. How is it physically possible that a video purportedly demonstrating the teleportation of a commercial airliner, fundamentally rewriting the laws of physics and global power, could sit on a public YouTube server for 9 years without triggering a global societal meltdown?
It is the phenomenon of context collapse. The medium dictates the reception of the message. If this video were presented during an emergency primetime broadcast by the Secretary General of the United Nations, panic would ensue.
But it wasn't. It was floating in the digital ether.
Exactly. It's the social media feed sandwich. I liken it to scrolling past a profound, universe-altering discovery because it's sandwiched between a cat video and an ad for toothpaste. You watch a cat fall off a counter, the next video is a leaked military satellite feed of a plane being consumed by a wormhole, and the next is an influencer selling mint toothpaste. The sheer absurdity of the context completely diminishes the impact of the information.
The truth is perfectly camouflaged by its own surrounding noise.
If this technology is real, and the evidence is out there, does the sheer absurdity of it act as its own perfect camouflage?
The brain's editing suite just deletes it. If information falls too far outside our established framework of reality and is presented in a mundane context, we fail to register its significance. And this exact vulnerability of human perception is what drives the profound pivot in the final act of the broadcast.
Yeah, they take a really hard left turn here.
The participants completely abandon the analysis of physical crafts, radar data, and military technology. They turn their attention entirely inward to the architecture of the human mind itself.
If our perception is so easily manipulated by context and biological filters, how do we find out what's actually real? The conversation dives into the study of consciousness, specifically through the lens of psychedelics like DMT, dimethyltryptamine, and psilocybin, the active psychoactive compound in magic mushrooms.
The speakers ground this esoteric topic in hard science, specifically referencing groundbreaking research conducted at institutions like Cambridge University. Traditionally, DMT is inhaled, producing a violently intense but very brief experience, often lasting only 10 to 15 minutes.
But the new methodology involves administering DMT via a continuous intravenous drip.
Right, this technique is called extended state DMT. By carefully regulating the flow of the chemical into the bloodstream, scientists can keep participants immersed in the psychedelic state for prolonged periods, an hour or more.
And the data they are retrieving is wild. The participants are not reporting random, chaotic, kaleidoscopic hallucinations. They are reporting highly structured, consistent environments. And crucially, they consistently report encountering the same types of autonomous entities.
The most frequently cited archetypes are described as a hybrid between mischievous children and jesters or jokers,
Which forces a brutal scientific and philosophical confrontation. Are these geometric gestures merely complex hallucinations generated by the specific neurochemistry of the human brain misfiring under chemical stress? Or is DMT functioning as a biological key? Is it unlocking a perceptive door to a frequency of reality that is objectively real, inhabited by autonomous entities, but permanently invisible to our baseline consciousness?
One of the participants shares a deeply personal account of a DMT experience. They describe being thrust into an encounter with what they could only articulate as a geometric complex, an entity composed of shifting mathematical architecture. The entity did not communicate using spoken language or telepathy in the human sense. Instead, it radiated an overwhelming, urgent, conceptual feeling.
Look, look, look. Take this all in.
But the tragedy of the experience, as the speaker notes, is the fragility of the memory. The human brain is simply not equipped to store that level of multidimensional data. They describe the memory fading incredibly rapidly as they return to baseline reality, like dry sand slipping through their fingers.
Or like trying to desperately hold on to the plot of a dream in the 5 seconds after you wake up and start brushing your teeth.
Exactly. The ephemeral nature of the DMT experience is contrasted with the heavier, more terrestrial weight of psilocybin. The speaker recounts 2 highly visceral encounters with magic mushrooms. The first was as a teenager at the Villiers, a massive forested nature reserve in the Netherlands.
And it did not go well.
No. The chemical overwhelmed their sensory processing. They experienced intense physical and auditory hallucinations, leading to a state of absolute primal terror. They spent 4 hours huddled next to a campfire, just paralyzed by fear.
It's the classic bad trip, where the ego is dissolving and the brain interprets it as literal death. The speaker shares a second, equally terrifying anecdote set in the urban environment of Amsterdam. They describe walking down a cobblestone street at night under the influence of psychedelics.
And they looked at the shadows cast by the streetlights underneath the parked cars. And their altered brain interpreted those shadows not as absences of light, but as literal, bottomless black holes torn in the fabric of the street. They were paralyzed by the sheer terror of falling into the void.
But the resolution of this anecdote is what matters structurally to the argument. The terror was completely absolute right up until a friend, someone highly experienced in navigating altered states of consciousness, simply placed a calm hand on their shoulder and said, "Act normal, man."
And in a fraction of a second, the terror evaporated. The bottomless black holes instantly resolved back into harmless shadows.
It's a localized reset of reality. The friend's voice served as an anchor to baseline consciousness.
Precisely. It demonstrates that while these chemical substances drastically alter the parameters of perception, human consciousness remains the foundational bedrock. The experience is not entirely dictated by the external chemical. The internal consciousness can reassert control. This realization leads the discussion directly to the work of investigative journalist Mark Gober and his podcast, Where is My Mind?
This is the massive paradigm shift of the entire deep dive. Gobert's thesis, which the speakers adopt enthusiastically, suggests that our fundamental understanding of biology and consciousness is entirely backwards. The traditional materialist scientific view is that you are a biological machine, a meat computer. Your brain fires neurons, and consciousness is just a byproduct of that physical friction.
But Gobert argues the inverse. We are not biological humans who happen to generate a conscious experience. We are a vast, non-local, potentially infinite consciousness that is currently having a temporary, highly localized human experience inside a biological avatar.
But if we are this infinite, multidimensional consciousness capable of traversing the cosmos, why are we so incredibly limited? I mean, why do we spend our days worrying about paying taxes, sitting in traffic jams, and arguing about the price of groceries? Where is the cosmic awareness?
To answer this, the discussion introduces the evolutionary theory of the biological shield. If you read Aldous Huxley's The Doors of Perception, he refers to the brain as a reducing valve. The speaker in our transcript posits that the human brain is not an antenna designed to receive all the information of the universe. It is a highly specialized evolutionary shield designed to block it out.
I like to compare the brain to a pair of extreme, heavy-duty, noise-canceling headphones. The universe is playing a vast, chaotic, infinitely complex, multidimensional symphony. But if we heard all of it, our biological forms would just short-circuit. So the headphones block out 99.9% of reality and only pipe in the single, simple, repetitive drumbeat of daily survival.
From an evolutionary biology standpoint, this is a necessary adaptation. If you were a prehistoric hominid walking through the tall grass of the African savanna, and your brain was constantly tapped into a state of cosmic oneness, admiring the geometric perfection of the universe and communicating with interdimensional gestures.
Your situational awareness would be zero.
Exactly. You would be completely blissed out on the secrets of the cosmos right up until the exact moment a saber-toothed tiger walked out of the brush and ripped your throat out.
Survival requires extreme, localized focus. The brain evolved to restrict our perception strictly to the 3D spatial reality required to hunt, forage, reproduce, and evade predators. We are blind to the rest of the spectrum because seeing it offered no evolutionary advantage for physical survival.
This framework utterly transforms how we interact with the UFO phenomenon. The discussion brings in the theories of Jacques Vallée, the legendary astrophysicist and computer scientist who actually served as the model for the French scientist in Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Vallée's central thesis is that UFOs are not nuts-and-bolts spacecraft from Zeta Reticuli.
No, Vallée suggests that the phenomenon is a manifestation of a broader, interdimensional consciousness interacting with humanity. And crucially, it adapts its presentation to fit the technological paradigm of the era it interacts with.
It wears a disguise that our biological shield can sort of process. Hundreds of years ago, before the Industrial Revolution, peasants looked up into the sky and saw flying sailing ships, or biblical chariots of fire, or shields of light. During the late 1800s, people reported seeing mysterious airships with propellers. During World War II, pilots saw glowing Foo Fighters. Today, in the era of stealth bombers and advanced aerospace tech, we see metallic flying saucers and silent black triangles.
The phenomenon presents itself in a guise that our specific era of consciousness can almost comprehend, resting right on the boundary of our conceptual framework, like Cook's ship for the indigenous Australians.
But if we apply this logic, I have to push back on the nature of the encounters themselves. If taking DMT or having a close encounter with a UFO represents a brief moment where our evolutionary shield lowers and we glimpse the true reality, why is the data we retrieve so bizarre? I mean, if these entities are part of a higher, vast consciousness, why do they appear as absurd gestures? Why do they just tell us, look, 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 why aren't they handing us the cure for all diseases or the blueprints for cold fusion or instructions on how to clean the oceans?
You are attempting to assign human motives to a non-human intelligence. Expecting concrete, anthropocentric solutions for multi-dimensional entities is akin to an ant expecting a human to kneel down and explain the intricacies of the global stock market.
The ant lacks the framework to even begin to understand the explanation.
Exactly. The agendas of these entities, if they possess agendas in any way we would understand the word, are entirely alien to our biological imperatives.
Which brings the entire broadcast to its culminating point, the human reaction. If the phenomenon is incomprehensible, how do we frame it? The transcript contrasts two very distinct competing narratives that are currently fighting for control over the public's perception of UFOs.
The first is the political and military frame. This is the dominant narrative currently driving the bureaucratic push for disclosure in the United States government. It explicitly portrays any unknown aerial craft or anomalous encounter as an inherent threat to national security.
It's the most primitive reptilian response possible. We don't know what it is, we don't control it, therefore it must want to destroy us.
It is a response driven by institutional self-preservation. Sociologist Max Weber defined the state as an entity that holds a monopoly on the legitimate use of physical force. If an object can violate a nation's airspace with impunity, deactivate its nuclear weapons, and outmaneuver its most advanced fighter jets, the state's monopoly is broken.
They lose control.
Right. To maintain legitimacy and authority over the population, the government must frame the unknown as a hostile enemy. Furthermore, the threat narrative is incredibly convenient for the military-industrial complex, justifying massive increases in defense spending and the creation of new military branches, like the Space Force, to combat the perceived enemy.
But the discussion forcefully pushes back against this fear-based narrative. They point to the historical behavior of the objects themselves. We talked earlier about UFOs hovering over nuclear installations at Soesterberg. This is a massive, documented global trend. UFOs frequently visited the atomic bomber bases in Roswell in the late 40s. They have hovered over American ICBM silos at Malmstrom Air Force Base and literally deactivated the nuclear missiles, taking them offline.
A military mindset views the deactivation of weapons as an act of hostility, but the alternative framing views it as an intervention. It looks less like a prelude to an invasion and more like a higher intelligence expressing profound concern for a spiritually immature species that has just discovered the atomic fire and is in imminent danger of burning down its own planetary house.
This leads to the second framework, the experiential frame. This approach treats the encounters not as military threats, but is either entirely agenda-free, like the children at the Ariel School receiving a blunt environmental warning, or as deeply spiritual events. The discussion mentions figures like Dr. Stephen Greer, who approaches UFO contact protocols as exercises in raising human consciousness and establishing peaceful, meditative communication.
The psychological consequences of adopting these frameworks are diametrically opposed. The military narrative, rooted in fear and the threat matrix, causes a severe narrowing of human consciousness. It makes a society defensive, paranoid, heavily militarized, and closed off from spiritual expansion. It reinforces the rigid structures of the biological shield.
The experiential framework, however, what the speaker affectionately refers to as embracing magical thinking, does the exact opposite. It induces a profound state of wonder. It elevates consciousness, breaks down the rigid parameters of the biological shield, and vastly expands our perception of what reality can encompass.
We project our own unresolved psychological issues onto the phenomenon. If we approach the universe with a history of territorial violence and war, we will perceive the universe as violent and territorial.
So the question is, are we projecting our own incredibly violent human history onto entities that might actually just be cosmic environmentalists trying to keep us from destroying the petri dish? If we strip away the politics, the secret files, and the defense budgets, what this deep dive really reveals is that the UFO mystery isn't about the flying metallic objects in the sky at all.
It is a mirror. It is the ultimate reflective surface, reflecting back to us the severe limits of our own perception, the rigidity of our institutional belief systems, and the profound, terrifying mysteries of consciousness that we have barely begun to map.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started by examining how a Dutch political program focused on the cost of groceries suddenly pivoted to alien disclosure. We unpacked the childhood trauma of being mocked over a Roswell tabloid and how it forged a rigorous skepticism. We dissected the mass sighting of 62 school children in Zimbabwe and the grammatical authenticity of telepathic warnings. We debated the theoretical physics of Lockheed Martin wormholes teleporting MH370. We navigated the multidimensional realms of DMT jesters. And we completely reimagined the human brain as an evolutionary shield designed to filter out the cosmos.
The central takeaway woven through all these disparate topics is clear. The pursuit of the unknown is a balancing act. It requires us to maintain a rigorous, unyielding, critical skepticism of the data, while simultaneously keeping our consciousness elevated and open to possibilities that shatter our current paradigms.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought to chew on, something that builds on everything we've unpacked. The entire argument rests on the idea that our brains evolved this biological shield to filter out multidimensional reality so we wouldn't get eaten by tigers. We needed a hyper-focus on basic 3D survival. But if you look at the trajectory of human civilization today, we are rapidly moving into a post-survival age. We don't have to hunt tigers. And with the exponential rise of artificial intelligence and advanced robotics, the basic, tedious labor of physical survival is on the verge of being entirely outsourced to machines.
A fascinating extrapolation. If the cognitive resources previously dedicated to physical survival are suddenly freed up,
Exactly. If the biological shield was evolved exclusively for physical survival, and physical survival is no longer our primary daily imperative, is the sudden, explosive global uptick in UFO interest, the mainstreaming of psychedelic therapy, and the rapid, chaotic shifts in global consciousness happening because our evolutionary shield is finally, collectively beginning to lower. Are we evolving past the need for the filter?
if the shield is indeed dropping, the reality we are about to perceive will make our wildest science fiction look like a children's book.
So I ask you, our listener, as you walk outside today and look around, remember the indigenous tribes who were entirely unable to see the massive wooden ship anchored right off their own shores. What else is standing right next to you right now that you simply do not have the concepts to see?
A profound question to carry forward.
Thank you for taking this incredible, mind-bending journey with us. Keep looking up, keep looking inward, and above all, stay insanely curious. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.